if we're only focused on improving the products and the organization and not ourselves, not to better our person, then that's the distinction between like a growth mindset culture and not. Like in a growth mindset culture, part of what we're doing is collaborating on continuing to evolve ourselves, to grow ourselves, to increase our understanding and our skills.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm Jessica Neal. I'm solo again because Patty's still recovering from surgery, but I have a very, 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 very exciting guest today. Many of you have probably read his book, seen his TED Talks. His name is Eduardo Briceño, and he's the author of an amazing book. And if you haven't got it, you need to get it. It's The Performance Paradox, Turning the Power of Mindset into Action. His TED Talks have over 10 million views, which is just kind of crazy to me. But welcome, Eduardo. Tell us about all of it. Like, how did all this happen? I'm curious. You are in San Jose, California, and you write a book, and then you're like a famous TED Talk person.
Well, Jessica, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to our conversation. How did I get here? Totally unexpected. I would have never thought that I would be doing what I do right now. You know, I grew up in Caracas, Venezuela. Everybody I knew just lived there, which was a great place to live, but I never thought I would move to the US. My dad kind of unexpectedly got transferred to Tulsa, Oklahoma when I was in high school, finished high school there, ended up going to college here. And I grew up not really interested about anything in particular, so I would just do what was expected of me and just try to
You were like a
pass
good
the
kid.
tests.
You're a good kid.
I was pretty good. You know, I also tried to fit in, and the groups that were highest status were troublemakers. So I try to balance the troublemaking with the try to get by, and ended up studying in college finance and chemical engineering because I thought they would be kind of safe jobs, but I wasn't particularly interested in those things. Did investment banking for 2 years in New York and then venture capital for 5 years here in Silicon Valley. Interesting jobs. But at the end, my body broke down. I got into a pretty significant repetitive strain injury called myofascial pain syndrome. And at that point, I was at risk of becoming disabled and not being able to use my hands. And that was 27 years old. And I learned a lot of things. One of the things I learned is that I was treating my body as if I was in a marathon and in a sprint all the time, just super physically tense all the time on purpose so that I could perform as best as I could. And I learned a ton of things about, you know, nutrition, but also realized that I wasn't particularly passionate about the work that I was doing. At the time, I was the youngest person in my VC fund for a couple of decades. I didn't have operational experience, and you know, everybody was really kind, but I was supposed to, like, I was on boards advising CEOs and just was pretending to know what I was talking about when I didn't, and that was very stressful to me. And at that time, my wife, Allison, had a few jobs in advertising and media and technology, and she then became a teacher in East Palo Alto. And I saw a change in her that I hadn't seen in any other job transition. She really found, you know, something that she was passionate about, that she cared so much about her kids and their families. And I said, I want that for me. I want to figure out what that is for me. So I went to grad school, interested in social entrepreneurship and in education. And I studied education and got an MBA. And there I was introduced to Stanford professor Carol Dweck and learned about her work, read her book. And she was interested in finding someone with a business background to partner with to help bring growth mindset out into the world. This was back in 2007. and we co-founded a company together called Mindset Works. And I never thought I would become an entrepreneur. I didn't know any entrepreneurs growing up. My dad worked in the same company for over 30 years. But I learned a little bit about entrepreneurship when I was in VC. And so Stanford was a new world. I thought that I would be like, I grew up extremely introverted, so I'd be an introverted entrepreneur working in my office, in my computer, while other people went out to schools and districts to do professional development and curriculum development, which was not my background. And a couple of years in, one of my board members, Ellen Konar, sat me down. She said, look, we're trying to evangelize growth mindset. We're trying to bring growth mindset out into the world. As the CEO, people need to know who you are. You need to go out there and speak and evangelize, basically. And that was very uncomfortable for me. And I was so busy. We bootstrapped the company, like we were under-resourced. But a couple of months after that, Carol was asked to do a TEDx talk and she couldn't do it. And I thought, okay, maybe this is a great opportunity for us to get a message out there. It could potentially, get out there and reach a lot of people. So it was 6 weeks away. I worked really hard on the script and then on practicing. I was in Carol's office practicing with her, getting feedback and from a lot of other people. And it was 10 minutes. I was very uncomfortable. I'd never done any public speaking before, but I thought, this is 10 minutes. I can memorize this. I can go on stage. And my strategy on stage was, I will not look at people's eyes. I will just look at the back wall with lights so that I don't forget what I'm supposed to say. And that worked. And then I started getting asked to do more speaking in districts and eventually in businesses. And surprising to me, I love that. I became really good at it. And that's what I do full time now is I particularly speak in leadership summits in large enterprises that are trying to foster a culture of learning, a growth mindset culture, and do either kind of keynotes or workshops or other bigger programs to help them along that journey.
That's just fascinating. I myself also hate speaking publicly. Like I'm okay like having a conversation like this, but in front of a big audience, and I used to have to do it all the time at Netflix in front of thousands of employees. And I too would just practice so that and I was not look at anybody in the eye because and thank God the lights are so bright. It's hard to see.
Yes.
Like the first maybe couple rows you can see, but behind that you can't see anybody's faces, which is great. It's terrifying to do that.
Yeah, it was for me. It was terrifying. The first time in that TEDx talk, I didn't feel nervous the day before, but I am pretty bad at noticing my emotions. And so my wife Allison was like, "Take NyQuil tonight to make sure you sleep well." I was like, "No, I don't need it. I don't like taking things." I didn't take it, and at 3 a.m. in the morning, I was like, I have to sleep, and I took it, and then I was a mess the next morning. Luckily, I wasn't until last one. But the lights were a blessing the first time, but now I appreciate when I can look at people and the conversations and kind of can feel the energy in the room and work with it. So I do really enjoy it now, but it's been definitely a journey to get there.
Yeah. So talk to us about your work and this idea of learning and performance. And what I really love about your message is that when you're in certain modes, things are amplifying other things are taking away from other things. And if you're always in a performance mode, you're not learning, right? And then you plateau. But can you talk to us about your research, how you know these things, and some of the stories that you talk about in the book and then also in the podcast are just very, very interesting in general. So maybe we can unpack some of those examples as well.
Absolutely. So, when I was in venture capital, a lot of what was valued and what people talked about, what CEOs talked about, one of the things that people were looking for was people who could execute and perform. And that's a good thing. But I've realized that can be confusing too. I also grew up and in my career just thinking that the key to success was effort. If I just work hard and if people just work hard, then we will succeed. And what I've learned working kind of with Carol and other researchers around what makes somebody great at something, what develops skills, is that there's really like two kinds of efforts and two kinds of strategies and structures. one set is to perform and to get things done, but the other is to improve, and they're very different. And sometimes we get confused and we're not crystal clear about how to approach our work or our life. And so I think that a great way to understand this is to take ourselves out of our everyday context and examine people who are fantastic at what they do in an objective way. They're just super skilled. And so, for example, in sports or in the performance arts, I like tennis. And so if I look at a tennis player working, playing in a, US Open, for example, or Wimbledon or whatever, what I'm seeing them performing, and their sole goal at that point is to win the match. And so what are they going to do? They're going to be doing the things they know best. They're going to try to minimize mistakes. They're just going to do whatever is going to help them win that point. And so if they're having trouble, for example, with a particular move like a topspin serve, they're going to avoid that move during that match if they can. But then after the match, they're going to go to the coach and say, "Coach, I'm having trouble with this move of topspin serve. Let's work on that." And so their attention is totally different. It's like, let's work on this thing that I tried to avoid when I was performing. Now that's what I'm going to focus on deliberately to try to improve. And that's the difference between what I call the learning zone, is when our goal is to improve and we're using strategies to improve, and the performance zone, which is when our goal is to get things done and to get the results that we want as immediately, right, in this moment. And what often happens is that when we reflect on these two things, we realize that we are out of balance, right? And we are over-indexing on one side or the other. Most people realize that they're over-indexing on the performance zone because for a number of reasons. I mean, psychologically, we tend to overvalue the present and undervalue the future. That's a present bias. And there's all kinds of structures in society, like Wall Street, for example, that just values current earnings. And so all of that leads us to not invest sufficiently on improvement at the benefit of future performance. We just want to exploit our current skills to do the best we can right now. But the problem is that if that's all we're doing, then we're stagnating. We're not growing our performance over time.
Yeah, I mean, when I just think about what we valued and pushed for at Netflix, for example, we really did talk a lot about performance and high performance and execution and being better and better and better. We tried to build in learning as well. It was something that was important to us, but I always struggled with the traditional learning platforms or programs that you would find at traditional companies. I never thought that those moved the needle and made any bit of difference. Like, employees didn't walk away. Like, if you sent people to management training, they weren't better managers. They, were doing the same thing that they were doing before. And so Reed and I sort of got to a place where we were debating this and where we kind of settled is that, okay, well, if we could better the person, right, like then we would better the leader, better the employee, right? And so that's where we started to think about like pushing people on thinking more broadly, right? And so we started to, I'm sure you've heard of the Aspen Institute, but we were sending a lot of our executives to the Aspen Institute, and they weren't really talking about business. They were talking about ethical and societal things. And so we started to weave that type of learning into the company. And it did really ignite some things in our leaders. And also, I think that they valued that we were investing in them in this different way than what a typical organization would do, because the horizons were broadened in a sense. They had to grapple with like things that they hadn't grappled with from a human perspective, right? And they weren't talking about the Netflix P&L. They were talking about, the letter from Birmingham jail, right? And Margaret Thatcher's those were some of the things we were reading. So what do you think about how do you like get learning into your organization and what really works and what doesn't?
Sure. And I agree with everything you've said. And I love the Aspen Institute. I've done the executive seminar there, and I have a fellowship from the Aspen Institute. And so it's, for the listeners who are not familiar, a lot of what Jessica's talking about is like values-based leadership. So reading those things can help you reflect on what are my values and how does that mean in terms of how I lead and how I perform. And I love what you said about bettering the person. I think that's reflective of a growth mindset principle. And so growth mindset is the belief that we can change, that we can evolve our abilities and our qualities. And so that's what better the person is. And so what I would invite the listeners to think about is when we are focused on improvement and performance improvement at work, if we're only focused on improving the products and the organization and not ourselves, not to better our person, then that's the distinction between like a growth mindset culture and not. Like in a growth mindset culture, part of what we're doing is collaborating on continuing to evolve ourselves, to grow ourselves, to increase our understanding and our skills. And what you're saying, Jessica, a lot of programs are detached, they're not in contextualized, it's hard to integrate them afterwards because you go to class and then you come back to being full of tasks in your everyday. And so I think that the biggest opportunity in the workplace to embed more learning and improvement into what we do is to embed it into the way we work so that we learn while doing, not just separate from doing. Because we spend so much time doing, we can get a lot of things done with not just the objective of getting them done, but also with the second objective of how can we learn along the way? How can we develop insights? How can we experiment? How can we, learn more from our customers, so being more customer centric, learn from one another about how we're working together, what's working, what's not working. And that is easier to do by putting it into structures rather than teaching people and then letting them remember and have willpower to do these things. And so one thing that I'm curious about that I would love to explore with you is, what do you think are some of the structures that you used at Netflix that led not only to getting things done, but also to improving how to get things done better and to evolve yourselves and become better people over time?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I mean, we experimented a lot. So there was that. And I think that Reed was a learner himself, right? Like he was a person that was just in his DNA to constantly be learning. And so I think from a foundation, when he was setting up the organization, like that mindset just was there. And we, for good or not good, we didn't really talk about our successes very often. We were not very celebratory. It was like, okay, yay. But what could we have done better? Right. And so that question and like criticalness, right. Of like, okay, yeah, we did it, but what should have been different? What should have been better? What do the customers want? How can we test more? How can we experiment more? That was sort of just day to day in the operations. And then with the more sort of formal learning things and exploration things, we tried a bunch of stuff that didn't work, that was maybe more traditional, but then we ended up building our own learning center, like a seminar place. We hired the guy that ran the Aspen Institute to come run our Aspen Institute. And we would send all of our executives, and this was director and above, away for one week. So really they were gone 4 days because it was a day of travel. And they would go away together, and we curated this seminar. And it again was very values based, like the Aspen Institute. And we would curate the group of people that would be together, right? And we had people all over the world, and we wanted to make sure that different functions, different regions were all kind of coming together. And then they would also make a movie together every weekend because we were Netflix. And, people walked away from the week having learned how to do production, right? Which was a big thing for us because we were becoming the largest entertainment company in the world. And we were making content all over the world, and having people understand how that's done, right? And how hard it is and how challenging it is to write a script, to film, to get the shot right, to, whatever. And then, having these value-based conversations. And so they would walk away from the week just feeling unlocked, grateful, and just having a completely different perspective than they did when they walked in the door. And so that was sort of when we got to the idea that this was going to be good for us, then it was like, okay, let's go buy a property. Let's go build a whole place where we can just dedicate time to this. I guess similar to like what GE did back in the day.
So a couple of things that come to mind there for me that I want to call out. One, that exercise of immersing people in the production of movies, which is what you do. One of the things that it does is it helps us develop kind of systems thinking of like, how is what I do play into a bigger system of what Netflix does and how Netflix interacts with the world. And so that facilitates more cross-functional collaboration and more holistic problem solving, right? Rather than siloed problem solving, we can collaborate more with others to come up with better solutions. You talked about not maybe, I don't know if you under-celebrated success, maybe not, but you definitely talked about what could we do better, right? And I think that Netflix also, and Reed is a fantastic learner, and he's always been like a great funder of learning and education. He funded a fellowship that I have done called the Bahara Aspen Fellowship. And so he's a great model of all this. And I think one of the things that you all did that you nodded to was when people make mistakes, you encourage them to share that with the whole company and share the lessons learned. A couple of other things I'd love your thoughts on. One thing that I think you did that I love is kind of farming dissent. How does that tie into learning?
Yeah. Well, this kind of goes back to how critical we were. Farming for dissent was a big part of our culture. And it came from being critical. Like we were always trying to tease out like the tension and why not to and what to invest in and where not to. And the aspect of challenging one another was there. There was, I think what sometimes you see, especially in organizations as you get higher up, a lot of people question less, right? Because, the head of the C-level person said, we're going to do this. And there wasn't really a lot of challenge to those ideas or that strategy. And I think, Reed always wanted that, especially for himself. Right. Cause he was like, I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty smart, but I'm not always right. And, the idea is to challenge, to question so that we're really thinking and being incredibly thoughtful about the things that we're executing and doing before we do them. And so that was kind of always pervasive in the culture. But, and at some point, it got a little too much, right? So when we were, I don't know how many thousand people we were, maybe like 4,000 through maybe more than 3 for sure. We were getting a lot of people having the freedom to farm for dissent and question things and challenge the ideas. But then it was like a little too much, and leaders were a little bit like confused on like, well, what do I do? And then it was like, oh gosh, oh no, are we going to be consensus? Are we going to slow down? And so that's when we also added in, of course, you're farming for dissent and people can have input and challenge, but also there's an informed captain, and that informed captain can then decide when that challenge is enough and they have enough information to go forth and make the call, and then they're responsible for that call. But it really amplified our ability to be extremely thoughtful about what we were executing and why. But also, people think that it might slow things down, but it actually sped things up.
Great. Well, so, I love, I didn't know that's where the informed captain came from, but that's fantastic. I love it. And so farming for dissent, in a lot of companies or even as individuals, we come up with a great idea and we run with it, right? It's like, this is awesome. Let's go do it. Let's go execute. And sometimes that might be appropriate, but farming for dissent, when we say, hey, like, what am I missing here? What is a different perspective? That's a structure and a principle that makes us smarter, right? That helps us become smarter about the decisions we're making, become more aware, and improve what we're doing. And then, but maybe what I'm hearing is that at that point, that was leading to too much learning, like maybe a little bit of imbalance in the learning and performance yin yang, where you weren't over indexing on the performance, you were over indexing on the learning side, and that was preventing you from performing and getting as much things done in the performance zone. And so the informed captain is a way to say, this is how we shift more toward the performance zone. We need somebody who makes the calls and says when do we have enough information. But so along with farming this for dissent, I would say, I think you had a principle of leading with context, of leaders, saying kind of what are the goals, what's the context, and then people being empowered to act and to make decisions. That is, I think, another learning zone strategy and performance zone strategy that makes the organization more agile. It makes the collective intelligence to come alive and for people to be thinking and acting more closer to the customers. You also have 360 reviews, right? Where I understand
you know a lot about Netflix.
I love like the culture you built in Netflix. It's really legendary. And I understand Reed had like a spreadsheet where he would solicit feedback from the whole organization, and that was visible to everybody. Transparency is also really important, and it was a principle as well. So I think you had a ton of principles to foster both learning and performing, and at times you even found yourself too over-index on the learning side and had to figure out how do we then shift more to a performance zone.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I never really thought about that I thought of it more of, how we operated, which is true, but you're right. That's a learning. That was part of our learning. And, one of the other things that Reed did, which I thought was, pretty fantastic. He would ask for feedback all the time and he would get feedback, but he once a year would, send out a note, and mostly to like the directors and above, to say, what would you do differently if you were CEO? And it would be like wild, some of the things that he would get, which were like, he's definitely not going to do that. But then there were valid things that like he had not considered, that he should do. And that's another way of farming for a dissent,
Yeah, farming for dissent, farming for ideas, using the collective intelligence. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think maybe what some of the listeners should take away from this is that there's the formal way of learning, like having a learning program. Maybe that's helpful, but there's natural ways to have a learning culture that fit into how you operate and how you're structured, which is what you're sort of alluding to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you said that you had a high performance culture, and I agree with that, but the lens was probably not this quarter. It was like, how do we perform to become an amazing, much bigger company and these amazing goals? And that lens of, medium and long-term goals and how do we get there, that involves a mix of learning and performing today and investing and getting better, rather than extracting everything that we can to maximize this quarter's performance.
I am glad you brought that up because I think many companies operate in that way. I wonder how you feel about this because I'm always conflicted, but I feel like OKRs and KPIs keep you pretty short-term focused. We never did them at Netflix, and we've done them at some of the companies that I've been on the board for, and I was at Coursera. We had OKRs, and the OKRs were, in my opinion, very distracting because they were short-term focused, and then the team would be coming back to the board and to the C-levels halfway through the quarter being like, we have to change everything because it's not, and they were more managing this presentation and these things that were not necessarily the right things, right? And you learn that as you go, because when you're doing things that nobody's done before, I mean, it's hard to know month to month what you should focus on. That's the journey. You're learning and making mistakes and changing and evolving. But at Netflix, we never did those things. We really had very long-term focused goals and generally it was around subscribers, right? And so, we were at 5 million subscribers, and then the next goal would be 10 million. right? And then we were at 10, and then it was 20 million, right? And so they were big, lofty goals, but we knew that in order to get to 10 million, to get to 20 million, to get to 50, to get to 100, and way past that, we had to make the best content in the world. We had to, have the best product in the world. People had to be able to find the things that they wanted to watch quickly, right? And so everybody kind of knew how to anchor up into that. But how do you feel about like OKRs, and do they help you learn? Do they help? I don't know.
So I think certainly the long-term goals, I think, are really, really important. And whether kind of OKRs can be helpful, I think probably depends on the organization. So something that you have said before that I completely agree with is, companies shouldn't just copy what another company did, right? You need to figure out what makes sense for you and be creative about, how it fits your culture and the work that you do. And so I think OKRs can work in some context and be part of it. I mean, they've been very helpful at Google and not in others, but not at the expense of the long-term goals. And sometimes the short-term goals can be really helpful toward the long-term goals. Where I've seen them work best is where there's an ambitious, so there's a long-term, decade or 5-year, 10-year, 15-year BHAG. And then there are a series of, 6-month goals or 1-year goals, but 6-month goals where there's something ambitious that as part of that big goal that you're going to be growing a lot on that involves cross-functional collaboration. And so the organization needs to work together to meet this very ambitious 6-month goal is something that I've seen work in different contexts. But again, I don't think there's only one solution that works everywhere.
Yeah, I agree. So if I'm a CEO or I'm a CHRO or just a leader of a team, and I'm trying to instill more learning and more performing, what's your advice to me?
It depends on where you are starting from, I would say. Reed, as you said, is an amazing learner. He values learning. He got all this stuff. And so that might be different. But a person like that might realize that, and I'm not talking about Reed in particular, but somebody who maybe was a very passionate learner and now is a CEO, they might realize that they're not being clear enough about guiding the organization toward engaging in learning and performing and why, and distilling why this is important and what it means. Leaders at all levels, under communicate by 9 times more than they over communicate, because we tend to say something once and think people remember it and that they understood it better than they did. And so we need to be more explicit than we think we need to be. We need to communicate more often. We need to celebrate when we see what the behaviors we want. And we need to do that a lot more often than we can. So that's, one of the things that needs to happen is, are people clear on how we want to behave together? And are they getting that language and reinforcement and motivation for not only what to do, but also why it's important and how it's going to help all of us meet the goals that we already care about, that whatever that is. We can think about, are the structures and habits that we engage in facilitating kind of everyday learning on the job? And so the meetings, for example, like LinkedIn looked at their meetings and said, our weekly meetings with their top 100 leaders, all of our topics are performance zone topics. And those are important, but we're not talking about anything that promotes learning in that weekly meeting. And so they just crafted, they put a section of the meeting where they invite anybody to share something they learned the prior week that could be helpful to other people, and what are implications for what we can do differently going forward. And then the meeting became a lot more a meeting that people wanted to attend, and people started asking, can I just listen in on this meeting because I've heard it's really fruitful. So that's just changing the agenda. If you change the agenda, you change the conversation. So what are not just teaching people what to do and say go do it, but how do we make it really easy and part of the normal standard way that we work together? And then modeling learning, visibly and explicitly, like Reed does, right? Of soliciting feedback, asking those questions of, if you were CEO, what would you do? And explaining why you're doing those things. Here's why feedback is important. Here's why it is important that I and everybody else does this. And through that, you continue, shifting the culture. Anything else that comes up for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm so glad you said all the things that you just said. And, at Netflix and now in my life where I'm in VC and, I'm an advisor and I'm a board member and the under communication is like a real big problem. And it was one of the things that we spent an enormous amount of time on at Netflix because we were sort of obsessed with context, right? And everybody having the information to make the best decisions possible. And we were over communicating. I remember talking to our CMO one time, Leslie Kilgore, way back in the day, and I was like, oh God, I'm like saying the same thing over and over and over again, so boring. And I remember her saying to me, she's like, first of all, it's not about you, it's about everybody else, and your job is to lather, rinse, repeat. Lather, because you're right. Like, you think you said it, but they didn't hear you, or a bunch of new people started who weren't in that meeting, or people were sick, or or they just forget, right? They forget. So you have to say it over and over and over again. And then, I love the idea about just this making it simple and easy, because I think when you say learning, that seems like such a big challenge, like, oh, I got to teach people all these things. But to your point, you can change an agenda in a meeting, and that's an easy, simple thing to do. And then you're learning, right? You can ask for feedback. That's learning. It doesn't have to be these like big structural, formal programs that you have to spend a lot of money in. It's how do you make it part of your day-to-day operating life?
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest opportunity, because we spend so much time working and it becomes immediately applicable. It is super relevant to getting better results right now in what we're working on. So I see that as the biggest opportunity rather than creating a learning program.
Why do you think communication is so hard? Like, what is it about why people don't just do it? I don't know.
Well, one reason I think is that we tend to, one cognitive bias is the false consensus bias, where we think that other people think the way we do, right? And they see the world the way we do. So it's hard to get into their shoes and to meet them where they are. And so we might not build from where they are to like the next level. And another reason is that the brain, takes a while to rewire, like, neurons that fire together wire together. But so if we have a big insight, right, we have a great conversation and people leave that with great insights and great understanding. Like, the thing that's most likely going to happen is we're going to forget 80% of it, 90% of it, because we're going to start doing other work, and then those neurons that connected are not going to, foment those connections permanently. And so we need to reignite those neural connections, over time, in order for them to then become permanently connected and for it to become something that we know. So those are some of the reasons that come to my mind. How about you? What else do you think?
Yeah, I think those are, yes. But I also think it's just not a habit, right? And I think you're the first thing you said is definitely right. Like, you have this false sense that everybody knows and that everybody knows what you're thinking is in your head, and that's just not true. People don't know. And so there's just this not natural thing of doing it. So I think you have to really force yourself to being in a program or a habit of doing it daily, right? And so I think one of the things that I did as a leader at the end of the day, and sometimes at the beginning of the day, I would think about, just ask myself this question: does everyone have the context they need to be successful tomorrow? Right? Or today? Or is there somebody that wasn't in the meeting the other day where I need to get them that information? So I would just, every day at the end of the day, I would think about communication, who I needed to communicate to, why did I need to communicate to them, and what was that going to, hopefully unlock or impact them in their ability to move as fast as they could. That way, I can get out of their way, they can get their work done. And then I can also relax as a leader because I know that I've given them all the information possible for them to be successful.
I love that. And that's an example of a structure and a habit that you set for yourself for things that are going to help you and your colleagues be successful, so that it becomes the default. You don't have to remember to do it every day. That's just what you do every day.
Yeah, but I had it, you have to make it a habit or you just don't do it. So I think that's part of the problem. Okay. We are running out of time, which is unfortunate. In every episode, we ask our guests to leave our listeners with a little nugget of something, like some gift that you want to give them. So what's the nugget you want to leave our listeners today?
Well, I just building on what you just said of a habit that you have, a daily habit, I would invite listeners to think about, do I have a daily habit to continue to evolve myself, right? So that I am evolving myself proactively rather than reactively or responsibly. So learning and improvement and growth development, not just as a responsive thing to when I make a mistake or when things don't go well, but what is it I'm proactively continuing to change in myself, and how do I remind myself of what that is on a daily basis?
Love it. Okay, we have a career confession. Would you indulge me and do this one with me?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. All right. Well, here's the context. Every meeting we have is about updates, metrics, and firefighting. We never pause to ask what we've learned or how we could do things better. It's like we're stuck on a treadmill, always running, but never really getting anywhere new. So here's the question. What's one simple adjustment I can make to our routines so that learning becomes part of the way we work, not something we try to squeeze in when we have time? Well, gosh, we were just talking a little bit about this. So what do you say?
Well, that just reminds me of the agenda as a structure, right? Of how do we change the agenda to change the conversation? And it doesn't mean that we don't talk about those things, which are also really important. It just means if you want to also talk about how to improve, it might be something that you talk about in the weekly meeting, like Netflix does, or it might be a meeting you have every month or every 2 months or every 3 months as a team to think about, hey, how are we working together? What's working really well? And what might be things that we might change or that we might work to improve together? And so you have an open conversation about that, and you have some possibilities of what you could work on to improve and how you're going to do that, how you're going to give and receive feedback. Are there resources or frameworks that would be helpful, or tools? And then select one of those things for the team to work on for the next cycle. That's something that's really helpful to continue to improve teamwork over time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great question, and you gave great advice. And I, you just think about how much time is wasted in these meetings, and people just feel like they are on a treadmill and they just go to these meetings over and over again. And nobody says, let's have a different agenda, and it just mind boggling to me. But creating a new agenda and adding in one of the things that you just suggested, not all of them, pick one, to your point, pick one and start trying it and working on it. And I bet it changes things dramatically. And then you'll pick another one once you get better at that one, right?
Yeah. And like you're saying, meetings are a huge common pain point. And so part of it is how do we make meetings, much more effective? And it can be a series of things. It could be, the right people might not be in the meeting. It might be fewer people that you need, but, you also need to be inclusive, and the meeting length, and what are we doing outside the meeting to, be prepared or afterwards. So, but those are all conversations we can continue to discuss and improve over time.
Yes. Well, I'm so thrilled that you came on today, and I enjoyed this conversation so much. So if our listeners want to find you, obviously they can look up your TED Talks and add to the millions of views you've already gotten. But where else can they find you?
Well, I'm active on LinkedIn, and I have a monthly newsletter on my website, briceño.com, my last name. And that comes with a free PDF on 5 strategies to develop a growth mindset.
Ooh, free PDF, everybody. But also buy his book and check out the TED Talks, because they are tremendous. And I know I got a lot from them, and I know you will too. Thank you again so much for coming on. We loved having you.
Jessica, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks.